Okay, let's continue with our keynote speaker, Utku. The title sounds chilly, blood allocation. Please, Utku, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, Alex and Elena, for organizing this very nice workshop. So my co-author Xian is, I believe, in the audience. He may help with some of the questions as I talk. So can I ask exactly how many minutes do I have from?
So you have 1 hour,
okay,
and I will let you know, say,
okay,
in 10 minutes, okay? 10 minutes
right.
to the
Thank you very much. So this is a joint work with Xian Han, who is a Shufe in Shanghai, and Onur Kestan, who is in Sydney. So it's a market design paper, but we have also a quite general theory of allocation of multiple units of compatibility-based identical allocation. So I will give first background about the market design application of this, that's how we came to this model in the end. So this is about blood allocation, and there are blood components. 3 of them are the mostly transfused ones: red blood cells, platelets, and plasma, and sometimes whole blood are the most used human body components in medical treatments. They are mostly used to replace or supplement missing components from blood. And transfusion is one of the most practiced medical procedures in hospitals. Despite that, there's a worldwide blood shortage. 119 out of 195 countries do not have enough in their blood banks to meet hospital needs, with a need to supply ratio of 1.12. So this shortage countries include almost every country in Africa, Oceania, and South Asia. And even developed countries have occasional shortages. Donating blood components is substantially less costly than any other organ or tissue donation procedure for a donor. A donor can donate red blood cells or whole blood once in every 56 days, while a donation of platelets and plasma can be made more often through a procedure called apheresis. WHO strongly recommends all blood is supplied by volunteer, non-remunerated donors. So despite the WHO recommendation and low opportunity costs involved in donation, it reports that only in 79 countries, which are 38 high income, 33 middle income, and 8 low income, 90% of blood component supply comes from VNRDs. And in 56 countries, more than 50% of blood supply comes from what we call replacement donors, or in some cases from paid donors. These countries include populous countries such as India, Brazil, and Pakistan. Replacement donors are also used unofficially in many other countries, the leading example being China, making the availability of accurate statistics quite difficult. Some experts and local authorities argue that the use of replacement donors is as safe and ethical as VNRDs. Moreover, it is the only ethically acceptable viable option for mitigating blood shortages in many countries. So what are these replacement donors? So in a replacement donor program, a patient receives the blood she needs by bringing forward a number of replacement donors who are family members or loved ones of the patient. So usually blood banks are in charge of these programs, and they use different exchange rates that determine how many donors are needed for each unit of blood received, according to shortages at the blood bank, or in certain cases, patient's medical urgency, or other demographics of the patient. So we were able to pin down two important shortcomings of these programs. First of all, optimized inventory management is usually missing. As one can imagine, based on donor screening and needs of the blood bank, these programs can be utilized. And inventory management is usually pinned down as an important goal for a blood bank. The other problem is we see use of official fixed exchange rates, but in practice, these fixed exchange rates are quite flexible, it turns out. So let me explain what that means. Certain patients may not be able to recruit the required number of donors that they're obliged to bring, making it difficult to receive blood. So there are two solutions usually we see in practice. Either this gives rise to coercion and black markets through which patients without donors pay others to be their replacement donors. So what is wrong? Paid donors are usually actually in some hospitals, they wait outside, just downstairs. Their health status is clearly questionable. They do this for money. Usually they are in very poor health, and they go downstairs, they pay money to the person, and they bring back the person upstairs. Okay, this is my brother's friend, and now this is my replacement donor. Or in other cases, rules are bent arbitrarily so that some patients are forgiven their debts, while others are not. So there is no transparency how this is practiced, but we've heard this quite often by talking to different officials. So in a way, there is no real trust or transparency of the system based on these two. So we introduced blood allocation with voluntary non-remunerated donors and replacement donors as a novel market design problem in this paper. And we allow for the possibility of incorporating endogenous exchange rates beyond the classical 1-for-1 exchange rate. So for 1 unit donated, you receive 1 unit in return. And we introduce, to facilitate this, we introduce a new concept, feasible schedule sets of patients determined depending on the idiosyncratic observable characteristics of the patient. And we define, in a way, mechanism designers' preferences over feasible schedule profiles. And under 2 assumptions that I will talk about, we inspect the mechanisms that maximize these preferences, which we call optimal mechanisms. And under these assumptions, these mechanisms turn out to be Pareto efficient. And also we give a practical subclass of these mechanisms. These are called, we call them weighted maximal mechanisms, which maximize the weighted sum of blood transfusions received minus a weighted sum of blood donations made by patients' replacement donors. That this class incorporates all the previously studied mechanisms that we are aware of in the domain of this compatibility-based allocation or exchange problems, like priority mechanism, maximal mechanisms, etc., under fixed exchange rates.
Utku,
Yes.
How do you prefer to handle the questions? On the go or at the end?
I would maybe I can give. So let me finish this part, and then maybe I can take questions.
Okay.
So in this framework, we show that the optimal mechanisms are what we call donor monotonic, which means bringing forward as many replacement donors as possible does not decrease the blood received by the patient under certain regularity assumptions on feasible schedule sets. And also we prove that they are strongly donor monotonic, meaning that bringing forward as many replacement donors as possible does not decrease the blood received by the patient, and if it leaves it equal, does not increase the blood donated by her donors. When one of the regularity assumptions is slightly strengthened that I mentioned above. And we conduct comparative static exercises regarding changes to this feasible schedule correspondences, which I'm going to call. We give policy recommendations and simulation results. So maybe I can take some questions now.
Utku.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit one more time? So what is replacement donor and what is exchange rate? So it wasn't very clear.
So I will be, can I delay it a bit?
Sure,
because I'm going to explain everything,
in more detail.
what replacement donor, etc. in a second. Okay, it will be, I hope, clear how this thing works. But to understand the replacement donor, this is the loved ones of a person, okay, who, in a way, in many places, it has to be a relative by law, some kind of blood relative. In some places, you can also bring your friends. So the blood bank says that, well, bring me a donor, and I will give you 1 unit of blood. Okay. Okay. But many times people require more than 1 unit of blood. They require 3, 5 units. Okay. Bring me 5 donors, and I will give you 5 units of blood. That's what they say. Or bring me 10 donors, I will give you 5 units of blood, which like in some places in Central America and Southern Africa, we see this kind of policies, or there could be more complicated policy rules, which I will exchange rate pool. So this is what I mean by exchange rate, okay, where so if you bring 2 donors for 1 unit received, I will call that 2-for-1 exchange rate, but that's a fixed rate. But there are certain ones which are different than this, which I will talk about. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let me give more information about the background of this problem. Okay, so to answer what Alexei was also asking, first of all, let me tell you about a bit more about blood transfusion. Basically, this is a very nice picture from the health services website from UK. So basically, there are 3 major blood components. So a donor donates either whole blood, and whole blood is separated to its components, but usually you can get 2 components out of whole blood. Okay, once a person donates whole blood, because and this is either 1 or 2 units depending on how you measure it, red blood cells, or 1 unit of plasma you can obtain. So but this is usually quite inadequate for like platelets, which are also used for chemotherapy patients, for example, in cancer treatment, or so they are like blood clotting factors, these cells, and so you need much more than, and for platelets, for example, whole blood donation is not utilized. Usually what's called a platelet pheresis is used. So literally a patient is attached to a machine, the machine circulates the blood and just takes out the platelets, these little cells from the body, and returns the remaining of the blood. And you get much more amount, like adequate for, let's say, for 1 patient, for example, out of this. And this can be done many, many times, much more frequently than whole blood donation. The same is true for plasma, although you can get 1 nominal unit from whole blood donation, you can get much more for plasma. using just getting the plasma out of your body. Plasma is the liquid part of the body, which has all these antibodies you heard about, especially during the COVID crisis, this convalescent plasma, which is the recovering patient's plasma with antibodies, rich antibodies, was used especially for diseases with unknown cures, infectious diseases. This plasma is very valuable. The most important example being Ebola. For Ebola, it's almost entirely, this is the only therapy used for using plasma. But red blood cells are, I guess, it is de facto, in the old days, we would use whole blood transfusion, but red blood cells are de facto replacement for whole blood cells. But in some countries, especially in developing countries, we still see whole blood transfusions done. So these things are collected, okay? Then they are processed, which takes about 1 day, the processing, up to 1 day in the blood bank. And then they are tested against diseases and they are put in packs. So each of these packs is called a unit, okay? They are sold, there's a standardized way of, they are stored in these packs. And the storage is very limited for platelets. You can only put them, keep them for 5 days because they need to be kept in the room temperatures. For plasma, you can freeze them, you can have it whenever, so there's not as much shortage for plasma. But for red blood cells and platelets, basically the main application of this model will be for those, but of course you can do it for other blood components. There is more shortage. All right, so to understand a patient, so what are the patient's needs from these? So a patient typically needs multiple units of, I will explain what compatible means, compatible blood component for one-time use or multiple uses, okay? To explain what I'm trying to say, if you wish, you can think that this demand is in some range min and max, okay? So in this, in a way, it's monotonic. It goes up to max. Why do we have this kind of assumption? So there are like 3 motivations this can be thought of for that. One of them is red blood cells used in surgeries a lot, right? If there's bleeding, it will be a replacement. Many times, medical doctors are quite risk averse in ordering red blood cells for surgeries, and they need to be tested before so they need to be opened, etc., before the surgery. Because there could be some unprecedented shortage, although like in many cases, this can be one in, let's say, they ordered 11 packs and only 1 pack is used in some kind of surgeries. But because of this high risk aversion, because if something goes wrong, it really goes wrong in those kind of surgeries. So the more is better, okay, up to that. But you can still do the surgery with, let's say, 5 blood packs, and which is done in many countries. Not that they want to have 11, but they have 5 and they do it with 5, okay. Another motivation is some like platelets, people usually need them, let's say, every day for, let's say, 5-6 days, okay? For some kind of after chemotherapy, for example, in once in every 20 days, you get chemotherapy every so in a way, the more is better. You can keep them for 5 days. So for 5 days, you can use a single unit today, another unit tomorrow, etc., etc. Okay. And there are also some kind of diseases where they have tried different amounts, so they can use little or more. And there is some evidence, medical evidence, that more is better than less in those. But less is fine when you don't have it. I mean, to give you the dire situation, for example, in India, many women die during childbirth just because of bleeding, because there's not enough blood there. Okay, and childbirth is considered an elective operation. Although it's not elective, you can schedule it in a way that in many times. Okay, so many of the things you can think of are called elective surgeries, and elective surgeries are one of the biggest uses. Unless you don't go to in the emergency to surgery, that's not called an. So that's the only one which is not called an elective surgery. All right. So, and let me finally give, before I don't want to spend more time on this, but let me give you just about the compatibility requirements. It's actually quite complex, and it depends on how these products are stored. So there are three types of basically compatibility requirements I'm going to talk about. Just think about there are two blood types. One is the ABO blood types. You are familiar with. Also, I'm sure everybody knows their blood types, so you are familiar with of RHD blood types. Okay, it's either plus or minus. So your blood type is a combination of your ABO and RHD blood type together. Okay, so this transfusion is conducted using packs of one main component, but usually stored with some amount of other components. For example, the very important example is platelets. Platelets are literally just very little amount of platelet in a big pack. The pack is filled with blood plasma. Okay, so it is put next to the plasma. So that's how it is stored. So red blood cells also carry some amount of plasma with it. But it depends, okay, and there are different protocols around the country, around the countries in the world, how compatibility works because of that, okay? But depending on these components, there are, like I said, three compatibility requirements. First of all, if there's a significant volume of donor plasma, you need ABO plasma compatibility. What is that? The antibodies in the plasma do not attack to the cells of the patient. Okay, so so if it's an AB type of plasma, there are no antibodies for AB blood A or B antigens because the donor is AB blood type. So AB can be donated to A and B, and because of that reason, A and B can be donated to O. Okay. And there is a significant volume of donor cells, especially, I would say, in this case, red blood cells. So platelets are not as big of the case. Then you need also ABO cellular compatibility. In that case, the plasma, the antibodies in the plasma of the patient do not attack to the cells of the donor. So then you need no antibodies in the patient's cells attacking basically to the donor. So then it is reversed. O can donate to A, which can or B, which both can be donated to AB. Okay. So this is what is relevant for example, organ donation because of that. Okay. So and if there is a significant volume of red blood cells, this is again about most important red blood cells, you need RHD compatibility because once an RHD plus blood touches the body of the internal cells of the RHD minus patient, antibodies form after donation, and it can create deadly problems. So minus can be donated to plus. Okay, so this complicated thing, depending on how the things are packed, determines the rules of how donation is done. Okay, and we are going to be agnostic about that. Okay, some countries allow, for example, ABO cellular compatible and RHD compatible red blood cell donation. Some countries say that no, we need our ABO identical because there is some plasma in the packs, and RHD compatible. Well, if it is platelets, some countries say, well, we need ABO plasma compatible because there's lots of plasma in the pack. So it is all over the place, but they are well established. These protocols are well established within each country. Okay, and we'll be agnostic about how these are done. So let me give you the model without further ado. So there's a set of patients, a set of blood types. Okay, a generic blood type is denoted by a capital letter X. Okay, and each patient has a blood type beta I, and there is a compatibility relationship. Calligraphic C of beta I is the subset of the blood types the patient can receive blood from. And there is a range, Ni lower bar and Ni upper bar, the patient can receive compatible units in. And the patient brings forward a donor set Di, okay? This could be an empty set, such that for any donor in the set, beta D is a donor, is the blood type of the donor. And we normalize what a donor can donate, okay, either 0 or 1 unit. So we have this normalization, okay? So that these are multiples of this are what the patients receive. And for simplicity in my model, I'm going to focus on a single blood type. Blood component. Let's focus on red blood cell. But in the paper, we also discuss integration of red blood cell and let's say platelet, because a donor can either donate red blood cell or platelet, where these replacement donor programs are mostly used. Okay, so you can do that thing as well. And there is a blood bank, and which has also an inventory of VX units of type X blood. So if you can think, this V is the voluntary non-remunerated donors who donated in the blood drives, etc., to the hospital, or maybe you obtained from earlier day, your exchange rate was high from replacement donors, etc. Okay, things like that. So in the literature that I've been involved in of organ donation, for example, for a patient, we've always talked about you receive one donor organ and you donate one in return, right? That's kind of an idea, all right? So I will call this 1 for 1, one received for one supplied exchange rate, okay? And also there have been recent studies, which I will go to talk about, on other applications of single unit demand and multi-unit demand with this kind of compatibility-based allocations, okay? And they also focused on this 1 for 1 exchange rate. So, however, in the replacement donor programs, blood banks use different or more sophisticated policies around the world. For example, yes, 1 for 1 is used, but in sub-Saharan Africa and Mexico, we have 1 for 2 exchange, for example, where there are, so for example, Mexico almost entirely relies on replacement donors to supply its blood supply. Okay, so they use that. So, and different policies for people, no next of kin exist in China and Cambodia. If you are from a different province, for example, then and you are like a guest worker in that, let's say in Shanghai, then it's obvious from your registration that you don't have a next of kin around you. Okay, so people don't ask for a replacement donor. Okay, so in Delhi, for example, every patient is required to bring only one donor, but they can receive whatever units they need. Okay, up to, yeah, I guess internally determined by the bank. And there is also, like I said, there is this non-transparent flexibility in exchange rates if patient cannot bring forward enough donors, which exist almost everywhere. So nobody puts a gun on the head of the patient in the end. So it's not clear how exactly this works. Like, do you know a doctor, or it's not clear how this works. Okay. So to accommodate that, we are going to talk about feasible schedule sets. What does this mean? First, let me explain. So in this world, a schedule is defined as R and S. Here, R is the units the patient receives, and S is the total units her donors supply. Okay, so S is practically the number of donors because we normalize every donor donating 1 unit. Okay. So which schedules are feasible for a patient? So what I will do is I'm going to define a calligraphic SI as a feasible schedule correspondence for patient I. So I will say RS is feasible for when the patient brings the donor set DI if RS is in the correspondence set outcome SI of DI. So you should be careful. This is very flexible because DI is the set of donors. Okay, so every donor can have different blood type. It can be quite general. Okay, so in the end, this scheduled set can be a function of all these different donor characteristics. So it can be a function of blood types of the donors bring. Okay, and this is a function of also I, right? So it can be a function of the blood type of the patient or other how urgent or this next of kin or all of these different things can be incorporated to this correspondence. So it is quite flexible in the general definition. Actually, it's too flexible. You will see when I say this, so I'm going to regulate it a little bit. So this graph will be important in the presentation. I will come back to this graph over and over again. So the horizontal axis is the received units. Okay, the vertical axis is the supplied units. Okay. So here is an example where the lower case NI bar is equal to 0 of a feasible schedule set of 1-for-1 exchange. So basically, this tells you which of these schedules are feasible. So it's 0-0 is feasible, 1-1 is feasible, 2-2 is feasible, 3-3 is feasible, 4-4 is feasible. So it literally means in the end, 1-for-1 exchange, because to get from 2 to 3, the marginal rate you have to pay is exactly 1 unit. So every marginal rate is 1 unit. If you look into that, you have to pay back. Okay, so this is this will be a typical for 1-for-1 exchange. This will be a typical feasible schedule set. All right, so this is the Delhi policy that I mentioned before. Each patient needs to provide 1 donor regardless of the quantity of blood she receives. Okay, so 1 is the upper limit of donation. Of course, 0-0 is always here. Okay, so NI lower bar to NI upper bar, you can get all these units. Okay, in this case, 4, 5, 6, or 7 units. All right. So when I say indigenous exchange rates, so I am literally talking about now, let's say in this example, if there are 3 units that can be received, then 3, 4, 5, or 6 units of donation could happen depending on, and they are all in the feasible schedule set. Okay, so I'm talking about a set of this sort. All right. And then depending on the blood bank's needs, objectives, daily inventory, etc., a patient can be charged more than 3 units of donors when she receives 3 units of blood, or exactly 3 units. Okay. So let me give you just.
Good. Sorry, can I ask you a question? But there is no free disposal in that, right? So you don't assume. In the sense, if I bring 3, that anything below certain number is available for me. Why there is no free disposal?
What do you mean free disposal is not available?
So say you have a 45-degree line on the upper one. So actually anything below any number Oh, so to the left of any other point should be available to the person, right? So
so basically, if you get 3 and 5, for example, this point,
let's go to 6.
That only I'm going to utilize 5 of donors out of 7 if you brought 7 donors, and you will get 3 units in return. Okay, so you are bringing 7 donors. You see in this.
Oh, this is.
And you are utilizing, you are possibly utilizing less than 7 donors.
Right, but if you, for example, 3 and 6, right? It's also 2 and 6 should be available, correct? For me, I can utilize
and 6 to. Okay, so you are going to a nice point. Okay, so actually, in the end, actually, you don't need to do that. Okay, it turns out that it doesn't affect incentives. It is not a has to. You will see. But let me talk about that. Okay, 2 and 6 is here, right? So these are all verifiable units, right? You are receiving them from the blood bank. So I quite don't understand what free disposal.
No, it's 4. This is 3 and 4, right? And I mean 3 probably, and 6 2 there. And
so
the one to the left
need, so I don't know what you mean. You have to. You can. The shape can be like that. I mean, clearly it can be a rectangle. This set can be a rectangle, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a rectangle. So in this example, it is not. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Utku?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question too. Why can't you condition the exchange rate on the inventory of the blood bank?
So why is SI is not a function of the inventory? Is that you're asking? So actually we can incorporate that. Okay, very good. Actually, to be honest, that's a good point. So the way we have written this function like this is that DI will be the only private information component, okay, of the patient. Actually, implicitly, this is a function of all the other patient sets, okay, their min and max, but this is okay, etc. So I'm just putting here what is the private information, but you're right, it can be a function of that. So there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, I can make it. Thank you. Maybe we should write it like that so that this is not. It is quite general. Yeah. But only thing is we know this function, so they are transparent. So when I mean like transparency, these correspondences are there. Everybody knows those correspondences, what they are. Okay. Of course, some of them could be very complex, but I will talk about more like simpler ones. Yes, that's all right. So now in this world, we have an allocation. So allocation basically tells that from each compatible blood type, how many units each patient receives and which of her donors donate. So alpha D is either 0 or 1, while alpha X of I can be a positive number or 0, okay, positive integer or 0. And there are two conditions. There is market clearing condition. Market clearing condition just says that for each blood type, what is given to the patients cannot exceed the total inventory plus the total donation by the donors through the replacement donor channel. And the other one is feasibility. So the total amount that each patient receives and the total amount that each patient donates should be in the feasible donor set, given that DI, capital DI, is what is reported by the patient. Okay. And so now let's talk about, so how should I think about preferences here for patients? Okay. So basically, we will assume that so patients have preferences over schedules in some bounded sets, capital WI, which is a subset of the non-negative integer plane. Okay, so this, if you wish, this Wi is, you can assume it is the range of the union of the range sets of each of this SI correspondence. It can be a super, but we are going to talk about changing the feasible schedule sets, etc. So it's a big, whatever that big set you can think of. Okay. And within that set, receiving a higher quantity of blood is always better, okay? And subject to receiving the same quantity of blood, her donor supplying a fewer total quantity is better. So there's this lexicographic, if you wish, ranking out of that. So in this set, if capital WI is this set denoted by dots, the minimum point with respect to preferences is the 0, 0. Then let's say this is the rectangular set between the her minimum demand and maximum demand up to some capital SI upper bar. Then the direction of increasing preferences are given by these green arrows. The maximum point with respect to preferences, the most preferred point being NI upper bar 0, where the patient receives maximum demand and donates nothing in the end. So this is the orientation of preferences. All right. So now, like I said, donor sets are private information of the patients. A problem is simply denoted as a donor profile. So that's what I was responding to Francis' question. And a mechanism basically, I'm going to fix everything else, is going to assign an allocation f of d, if f is the mechanism, for each problem denoted by the collection of these donor sets, capital D. Okay. And I will define two notions of incentives here. Okay. If you wish, this is like two ends of extreme ends of incentives. One will be donor monotonicity. It will say that if for every patient not bringing forward some donors does not increase the amount of blood received by the patient. Okay. So what does this means? Let's say di prime is a subset of di. Okay. So and di is something the patient can bring forward, a feasible set. So the units that patient receives denoted by fd of I is greater than or equal to the units she will receive when she brings forward di prime when other patients are bringing d minus I, the same as before. Okay. Of course, this does not take fully into account the preferences, these lexicographic preferences I mentioned. So I will also define strong donor monotonicity. So if for every patient not bringing forward some donors does not make the patients strictly better off, I will say then the mechanism is strongly donor monotonic. So just observe that now this allocation f of d is preferred. So f of d is actually the patient only cares about what she receives and how many units her donor donates. That schedule is at least as good as if she brought a subset of her donors forward. Okay, so this will be the two ends of, if you wish, this incentive compatibility requirement I'm going to look at, and there's a reason for that, right? It's not by coincidence I'm looking at these two, because in our imagination, blood donation is not as costly as, let's say, you're donating your kidney or your liver. Actually, in some health experts even say that it's quite healthy to donate your blood once in a while. Okay, but there are some cultural reasons. The only important thing here is basically literally bringing somebody through the doors of the hospital. That's the main cost. That's the only cost, just that travel cost is, but there could be other psychological barriers, right? So it's not as severe of a constraint as like donating your kidney in a way, okay? Donating blood in the end. So in that sense, I'm going to look at these two extreme incentive properties. And that, I guess, also motivates by the lexicographic preferences as well. Again, this is a bounded set. I'm not thinking about really extreme situations here where like somebody needs like 1,000 units or donates 1,000 units to receive 1 unit. I'm literally talking about very realistic exchange rates. Okay, here. Okay, so and efficiency will say that basically for each reported donor profile, there is no alternative allocation that makes every patient weakly better off and at least one patient strictly better off. So in this world, I'm going to focus on what I call optimal mechanisms. To define the optimal mechanisms, now I'm going to look at the preferences of a patient over, of the mechanism designer over schedule profiles. So a schedule profile is how many units a patient receives and donates among all patients. That's the profile. Okay, so I will call this W, little w. So, and cap W will be the cross product of individual these bounded sets. Okay. And the mechanism design has a strict preference relation. Actually, you need only strictness or resoluteness at the top, okay, over this kind of profiles. So for each problem, D and allocation alpha, okay, let W alpha be the corresponding schedule profile, how many units each patient receives and how many units each patient donates. So I will say that F is induced by a preference relation of mechanism designer preference relation if for every problem D, okay, FD is basically is one of the allocations. So these are all welfare equivalent. So there could be multiple F of these, but they're all welfare equivalent in the sense that W alpha is going to be at least good as W alpha prime for any other allocation alpha prime. So they maximize basically the mechanism designer's preferences. Okay. So I'm going to allow, I will make two restrictions on this preference relation. One of them is I will assume some alignedness of patient's preferences, meaning that if for every two schedule profiles W and W prime such that every patient weakly prefers W to W prime, we should have W is at least as good as W prime. Okay. So in the paper, we also think about blood bank as an agent. So if the mechanism designer wants to, let's say, maximize the inventory of the blood bank, for example, we can also incorporate that. But for the presentation purposes, I'm assuming blood bank is just an object over there, but it can be incorporated, and we do that. Okay, so alignment would also include that kind of things. The other one is basically I'm going to rule out sphere kind of complementarities. So I will assume that this mechanism designer preferences are additively responsive. Okay. So additive responsiveness means the following. So I will think about some basic schedule profiles. What's the basic schedule profiles? So W prime is what each patient receives and donates. But these are either zeros or ones, okay? This whole profile. So W prime and W prime are these basic building blocks of profiles, if you wish. And W is any arbitrary, so instead of this integer square, it should be the cap W set, sorry. In this cap W, it can be any schedule. So in a way, if the addition, component by component addition of this W prime and W2 prime, double prime with W are also in this capital W, then I will say that W prime is better than W double prime if and only if W plus W prime is better than W plus W double prime. Again, these are component-wise additions. So the reason we call this responsive is this is literally extension of responsiveness in the literature of matching. Okay, but we have this identical units, so we have we just basically add those identical units on top of each other. Okay.
Utku,
yes.
Utku, you have 9 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm actually almost, I gave you almost every definition. So I'm going to call under these two assumptions, if a mechanism designer satisfies these two conditions, then we'll say that F is an optimal mechanism. Okay, so optimal mechanism is, it's a maximizer of a preference relation through a feasible schedule correspondence subject to these two assumptions. Okay, so by definition, because of this alignment property, every optimal mechanism is efficient. So one practical subclass of these mechanisms are what I will call weighted maximal mechanisms. Okay, these weighted maximal mechanisms basically for each patient, and it gives two numbers. It's defined through two numbers for each patient. Okay, so WRI is a weight for received units of the patient, and WS is a weight for supplied units of the patient. Okay, such that WR of I is sufficiently large, meaning that WRI is greater than WSI times the maximum number of the donors the patient can give, or if you wish, you can put this SI upper bar, the upper limit of this WI sets I mentioned before. Okay, so this is just, it is large. And this FT is a argument which maximizes, okay, this weighted difference, okay, sum. So for all patients, look at all the allocations which maximize this sum, weighted sum of the received units minus the weighted sum of the donated units. Okay, so these include all the mechanisms we've seen in the literature before. A priority mechanism, for example, we talked about this in kidney exchange initially. Recently, Vikram Manjunath and Alex Westkamp has a paper in this multi-unit allocation. Although their model is a bit different than ours, they use this kind of a priority mechanism under this kind of, so it's basically lexicographically based on a priority order. So these are defined for one exchange. So this minus part loses its importance, because once you have 1-for-1 exchange, the minus part doesn't have to be there. Okay, of this mechanism, then it gives the highest weight to the first agent, substantially lower weight to the second agent, substantially lower weight to the third agent. So it creates like a serial dictatorship kind of an allocation. So that's what we call a priority mechanism. Or it maximizes the total sum of the units received, for example. So there was a recent paper by Tommy Anderson, Lars Ehlers, Agnes Che, and Albin Arlensen. They looked at this mechanism. They maximize the total units. Again, they have exogenous 1-for-4 exchange rates. So the minus part loses its importance. And they have like tiebreakers. They break the ties based on a priority order in the end, because there could be many maximal allocations. And in this paper, we talk about sequential targeting. You can do this kind of targeting. So first, for one subset of agents, you maximize their blood based on basically maybe blood type. Then you minimize their blood donation, then maximize like somebody else's blood donation, then all in like sequential in a lexicographic manner. This would be also in this class. Okay, so these weighted maximal mechanisms are optimal under a basic assumption of convexity that I'm going to talk about, there also you can compute as a relaxation of a linear program, although it's an integer programming problem. And since linear program can be solved in polynomial time, then you can solve this in polynomial time. And there exist mechanisms that are optimal. So this, our class is more general than this weighted maximal class, but these are the most practical ones. So what are these assumptions I have to assume on this feasible schedule correspondences? One is convexity, but since these are discrete things, I'm going to use a convexity assumption based on discrete sets, and in particular, what's called as a lattice convexity is the one that I'm going to use. So take X and Y, look at their midpoint, okay? So the infimum, the integer infimum of this integer vector infimum of this midpoint and supremum of this point should also be in this set, okay? So that's called lattice convexity. It immediately implies that the shape of the sets are exactly, the middle one here is the most general shape. It's a six-sided 45-degree in the positive direction of the what I'm looking at, okay, of the sets, okay. It can be a rectangle, it can be other shapes like here as well, okay. They're all allowed. So in our domain, the implication is this, all right. And the second assumption is, this is kind of related to, so initially I thought Alexei was asking something similar. That's the reason I exactly didn't understand what he was asking. So this is related to something, so I need some more regularity. So what I will say is that basically there's a feasibility of a positive price. So what does this mean? Okay. So basically it means as the following. Look at these top two blue points in the set, okay, on the left, okay, at the top. So it talks about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units of donation and 5 units of receiving, okay. But there is also a feasibility of receiving 6 units, okay, donating only. So this feasibility says that, well, then I should be able to charge an extra price for that. It doesn't say that I should charge, because that would mean immediately 1-for-1 exchange rate. But as the mechanism designer, I should have the feasibility of charging this positive price. So this should be a tip here at the top. Okay, so this violates this assumption. The same goes in the negative direction, in the lower bound direction. So we need tips at the end. The only exception of the tips are if you hit this hard bounds of the number of donors you brought forward, or 0 at the bottom. So you don't need tips if your set hits at the top. So this is these shapes will be allowed. Okay. And finally, let me give you the last assumption. Again, this is kind of difficult to understand if you try to read it. The thing I want to say is that the following, okay? So until now, all the assumptions are about fixed donor sets, okay? So I said that there is this nice diamond D shape in the positive orientation of these sets boundaries. That's all I said. And these two assumptions, except at the boundaries, give that shape, okay? But now you can imagine it is so much, there is so much freedom with the, if you bring forward different donor sets, this shape can change very arbitrarily, and you can immediately say that if you bring one more donor, I'm not going to give you anything, right? So this would discourage all the incentives. So I need to at least somewhat regulate the incentives of the donor. So this weak more favorability says that, okay? It literally says the following: if basically there are two sets of schedules S and S prime, I will say S is weakly more favorable than S prime if wherever RS is in S prime, okay, then there exists a possible, as long as it is possible, there exists a unit, a schedule in which the patient donates less or exactly the same amount and receives the same amount as R, as S prime under S. So in a way, you donate less or exactly the same and receive the same amount. So this set is weakly more favorable. S is weakly more favorable. And the second condition makes that assumption. So you donate if it is feasible, basically it goes in the other direction as well. Okay. So
Utku, I hate to rush you, but your time is
okay. Very good.
over,
So I will only give you one theorem. So this is the shape basically of this weak favorability, and this is our main theorem. Okay. Under these assumptions 1, 2, 3, every optimal mechanism is donor monotonic. Okay. And if you strengthen these assumption 3 a bit more, this weak favorability, you still have endogenous exchange rates, you get strong donor monotonicity. And the way it happens is that, yeah, let me not talk about it because it's gonna, but this presentation is on my website. You can look at it. If it's not, I'm going to replace them, okay? And we have comparative statics. If you make this donor schedule correspondences weakly more favorable for one patient, then that patient never gets worse off. Okay, and in the rest of the paper, we talk about how to design this kind of schedules. Okay, and this is related to this previous literature, like I said, in kidney exchange, dual organ exchange, we talked about at some point, and these other exchange markets, worker shift exchanges and priority mechanisms. And in the paper, actually, we generalize this result using this extended proof. Also, what if the compatibility relation is not detectable? So for other problems, let's say the compatibility relation is here is verifiable, but what if it is also private information? So we also prove that under our assumptions and some restrictions, these optimal mechanisms will also going to be weakly and strong this strategy proof when we talk about also revelation of compatibility relationships. Okay. So let me stop here. So there's all this literature. So there's one. So the only two things I want to say is beyond 1-for-1 exchange, there has not been too many papers except this competitive equilibrium idea of Budish. And there was a recent paper about there are different hospital systems, and the hospital systems exchange among each other kidney donors, for example, or pairs, if you wish, which pairs are valuable. So we had a paper in 2007. So Agarwal et al. So 5 co-authors. I think maybe Itai is in the was in the audience the other day. Talk about this beyond 1-for-1 exchange. What can you do? So in the Budish's case, of course, there is no incentive compatibility in a small market. In a large market, you get, but with pure endowments, again, incentive compatibility disappears. So you need always this fake money in these markets to work. So we have impossibility in that domain. Not our result, but it's known. Okay. Okay. Let me stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.